Virginia Casella and the Dragon Dream Soul Tribe Collective. Pleased to welcome Alex Lipton. Alex grew up in Mahopac, New York, where he developed a passion for cinema and storytelling. After watching John Landis's production for Michael Jackson's Thriller music video and the subsequent behind-the-scenes featurette, he became fascinated with the nature of how movies are made. Movies and the filmmaking process became a fundamental in Alex's understanding of spirituality, and at an early age, Alex was aware that reality and life itself has a behind-the-scenes world. Later, he moved to California in pursuit of a higher education and graduated from the film school in Los Angeles, Columbia College, Hollywood, with a BFA, Bachelor's in Fine Arts, in directing cinema and TV production. Growing up with the guidance of his uncle, Dr. Bruce Lipton, Alex was taught with the understanding of how our perception controls our biology, and that health and wellness are greatly influenced by our consciousness. Over a decade, it has been Alex's mission to help spread this message of self-empowerment using creative video production. He is guided by synchronicity and holds the subjects of ancient civilizations and lost worlds very close to his heart. And he spends his life helping others discover the wonders of the unknown. Having become a novice wizard of sorts, Alex is trained as a facilitator in Psych K, process which involves energy psychology and healing modalities. Psych K is a philosophy and method through which people can reprogram their subconscious beliefs in a matter of minutes. Alex is skilled with experiential knowledge of the tarot and astrology, often incorporating both into his practice of helping people remember their divinity and sovereignty as human beings. He takes great pride in serving humanity in order to help bring healing and love to Mother Earth and all of its inhabitants. Virginia Casella and the Dragon Dream Soul Tribe Collective are pleased to welcome Alex Lipton.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much, Sheena, for that lovely introduction. And this has been a really cool presentation so far. I just love the collaborative nature of things, especially in the world today. It's one of the most primal things that we have within us. Our human body is made of 50 trillion plus cells and bacteria all living together as one single unit. And when we look around, we see everything is all chaotic, 8 billion people on the planet. That's nothing compared to the cells. So right now we're living in a perfectly wonderful model of this collaborative spirit. So it's great I want to just thank all the other presenters and guests on the show. And Gina, thank you so much for hosting this wonderful conference. I have a presentation I would love to share with you today. It's something that I've been developing in my mind for quite a while. It has to do with God, spirituality, mythology, religion, even the institutions, a lot of occult and interesting lost information. Occult in itself doesn't mean evil or scary. It just means hidden. So there's a lot of hidden stuff that we're going to start to explore today. And I would just love to thank everybody again for being here. So the presentation here, the title I got here, it says, Did Monotheism Come First? Well, for anybody that doesn't know what monotheism, I'm sure you all do, but monotheism is this idea of the belief in the ultimate one God. There's only one God. And then they're compared to something like polytheism, which is the belief in many gods. And from a historical perspective, most academics will tell you that Polytheism preceded monotheism. This idea that the ancient Greeks, the Egyptians, the Sumerians, the Indian civilization, they all believed in all these different gods in a pantheon. We're going to go and explore a lot of this stuff later. But the big question came from a debate that I had with a good friend of mine after giving another presentation about a much deeper dive into history and mythology and religion and all that. And he posed an interesting question to me. This idea that he said was monotheism actually preceded polytheism, which is, kind of at first I was a little ajar when I heard that, because that's not what we know from history. But he had some really interesting points that made me want to make this presentation, because we ended up as much as we debated, we did get into an agreement, and I wanted to explore from my point of view what that agreement rests upon, this idea of unity. And we're going to go down this rabbit hole and look at history, philosophy, and human existence experience. And we're just going to scratch the surface. So thank you so much for being here. And we're going to go on a little journey here. So like I said, the question is, monotheism preceded polytheism. The question is that true? So we're going to discuss this philosophically, historically, and from a perspective as a lived human religion. And what do we mean by a lived human religion? Well, we can understand that when we start to go far back into history. Now, when you look at a history textbook today, you start to see that there's this big gap between chapter 1 and chapter 2. Chapter 1 is called Paleolithic history. This is this like really slow, very short chapter, relatively speaking, of stuff that happened 10,000 plus years ago. We don't have much evidence for what's going on there. We have these little figurines of divine goddess figures and megalithic structures and some stone tools here and there. But conventionally, people thought that this is, there was not much going on. And then chapter 2 is Neolithic history. This is the birth of agriculture. But the idea we're going to go into explore today is like, well, let's start off like what was going on back 10,000 years ago? Was it just primitive cave people just trying to survive, or was there something going on there that we're starting to find out? And if you're privy to anything going on in this new information today, there is a lot of evidence that perhaps these megalithic structures are way older than we thought they were, and that civilization itself actually stretches back further in time, past some sort of black hole or an event horizon, that there was some sort of cataclysmic event that wiped away our memory and our evidence of a lot of this civilization. So we're going to make some key distinctions here. We're going to talk about this idea of God, and these ideas often get confused as one. This one idea here is metaphysical unity, metaphysics as opposed to physics. Metaphysics is more like, it seems like woo-woo. You find the metaphysical section at a bookstore, but really there's a lot of science now that backs up what the metaphysical claims are, specifically something like quantum physics, energy, the stuff we can't see. So this idea of metaphysical unity is this concept called the one. This goes back to ancient Greece with Plato describing this thing called the monad. It's this source of everything. It's an absolute truth and omniscient just force. Plato called it the good, which, funny enough, is actually related to God. Good, God, good, good tot, right? But then another idea that gets convoluted with this is this idea of henotheism and monolatry. We're going to talk more about this in a little bit, but these are two subjects I didn't even know these terms before I made this presentation. When I started, after my friend and I had that conversation about what monotheism actually was, henotheism and monolatry is this idea, yes, there are many gods like polytheism, but that out of all the gods, there is one God that is supreme over the others. Doesn't deny the existence of others, but one is more important than the others. And then, of course, we have what's called strict monotheism. This is like what most people are kind of living in the paradigm of today, is that there is only one God that exists. None of those, all that stuff, Zeus and Poseidon and Osiris, all those guys, they didn't really exist. That was just the makings of a fabricated imagination, a highly imaginative people back then. We know better today, but did we? Do we? So we're going to start to look into this a little bit more. Remember how I said 10,000 plus years ago, there's more of a civilization that got lost. Well, what do we know about this early civilization? It's this early human religion. And I'm looking at my presentation. I think maybe the StreamYard kind of moved some of the images around. Hopefully it's not too messed up there. But the idea of early human religion is something that we can refer to as animism. This is not to be confused with animal worship. Animism refers to the idea that everything has a force that animates it. This rocks have animism, animals have animism, we have animism. The ancient people saw that everything had spirits. So that even includes things like forces of nature, like the wind or storms, even our ancestors. This idea that when we die, what happens on the other side, that there is some sort of continuity of life beyond that veil we call death. So there's a lot of divine sources all around. Everything had spirit. And this is, and what this reflects is not some worship of any spirit. It's just recognizing that there is a direct experience we have as human beings to this thing that maybe we'll start to call God. And it's not specifically theology. Theology is a term that comes later. Personally, my opinion is that theology is a field of study. That's why people can become theologians. They're studying this stuff. People back then weren't studying as much as being directly connected to it. So that's the ancient world. And then when we move out of animism and the ancient world of the ancestors and the shaman type culture, indigenous cultures, all still carry a lot of this legacy information and practice, like plant medicine ceremonies and drumming and sweat lodges. And it's interesting that all these ancient cultures share things that even they may not, like, why would they share them? Like, who told the indigenous people in Australia, the Aborigine people, how they're doing their ceremonies compared to what the North American Native Americans, for example, were doing? They all share some sort of common ancestry of ceremony. But as that moved on into polytheism and this idea of many gods, we have to, everybody's learned about this in one way or another. Like the ancient Greeks, like I said, they had the pantheon of gods. They had Poseidon, they had Zeus. And going back further, you have one of the oldest cultures on Earth, which is a very disputed place right now in the Middle East. You have the Sumerians. They had a pantheon of gods. And but the thing is also that the polytheistic world, they didn't just like worship these gods or pay tribute or offer sacrifices to these gods. They also recognized the forces of nature having a role to play in this pantheon. So there were gods of storms and fertility, like I mentioned before, these goddess figurines. They had gods of death. They had different powers as well. So the point is, though, that in this polytheistic world, there was no supreme manager of everything necessarily. People may have been more favored to one because they lived in a particular region. Like, this is the patron deity of so and so, and this is our patron deity. But they all share common connections. And again, this idea that the gods were not just these beings, which is a whole nother story. Like, who were these beings? But then also they represented aspects of our psyche. They have represented aspects of our mind. And there's a very serious, very honest continuity between the world of animism with this world, because people still had a direct connection with these gods. Even gods like Poseidon would interact with the people of Greece, according to these legends and mythology. They walked around amongst us, as opposed to today, where God's not like walking around on Earth. We're going to talk more about that later, as God being out there somewhere. So that's really important to recognize. It's still this direct experience. It's not some sort of worship, something outside we have no connection with. I mentioned henotheism. This is a really interesting concept. Like I said, out of all the pantheon of gods, eventually, and there's a lot of great stories that can tell how this became to be. We're not going to get into that now because there's a whole lot of can of worms. But henotheism, again, is this idea that out of all the gods, one reigns supreme, like a CEO manages a corporation. So yes, and all of these cultures had some sort of idea or understanding or practice of this. So, for example, in ancient Greece, out of all of the gods, you had Zeus, who reigned supreme over the rest. And even in Egypt, you have Ra, the sun god, the most virtuous, that reigned supreme over everything else. Each culture had variations, of course. But then the thing is that out of all of these different gods, the one reigning supreme, it's interesting. It tells you a lot about what that culture is all about. This is where we start to get what I'm what I'm trying to lead into here, which is this kind of this idea of consolidation of power, because these gods had a lot of power and they had a lot of influence over the events and the whereabouts of what was going on with human beings. So I want to interject here and emphasize something that's very important. It's this thing called language. Language is one of the most important things that helps us understand what's going on. If we didn't have language, I wouldn't be talking with you. You wouldn't be understanding what I'm saying. But the thing about language is that one word may have a meaning to you that does not have the same meaning to me. There's this great saying, I like to use it a lot just as a context, that one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. So it's the same person, but depending on how you look at it, it could be like a good guy or a bad guy. That's a theme that we see a lot through this ancient world that carries into today, this idea of heroes and villains. We have this archetype within our subconscious as well. It's programmed into us when we're kids with cartoons. You have the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder, and you have to kind of sift through the madness of what they're trying to influence you to do to make a decision. It's this idea of free will, but that depending on how you look at it, it might be different. So, like, one great example of this is Alexander the Great. I know I'm fast forwarding a little bit, but we know him today in the West as Alexander the Great. But there are a lot of cultures in the East that actually refer to him as Alexander the Accursed. Same actions, different perspective. It's very important. And we're going to start to lead into this like idea of monotheism, weave into it a little bit more. And this idea of like Yahweh, according to the ancient Israelites, Yahweh being the supreme God over the rest. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Yahweh and what exactly is Yahweh? Who is Yahweh? Because at the heart of the Bible, you get a sense of this idea of God. Today we have a book. It's called the Bible. It's kind of commonly understood that this is a book that tells the story of God's relationship with people, and as if that all of this from the beginning in Genesis to the very end in Revelation, there's a continuity. It's the same God that's just interacting in different ways, teaching us lessons, and we're learning or not learning. But when you start to break down the text and actually study the ancient texts, like the ancient Greek or the Hebrew or the Coptic, you start to see that all of these stories are collections. The Bible is not one book written from beginning to end. It's actually a collection of stories. It's more of a library, and some of these stories conflict with each other. There's a lot of contradictions in the Bible, let's just say. And one of the big ones is this idea of God being Yahweh. So one of the things Yahweh says, to stick with our idea of monotheism, how do we go from the worship of spirits and direct connection into the one God? Well, Yahweh has this really interesting quote. Yahweh says, "You shall have no gods before me." And what's important to recognize is that throughout the Bible, Yahweh does not specifically say there are no other gods. Doesn't deny the existence of these other gods, but just says you will worship me over the rest. It's very important. And it implies exclusive loyalty. And it's about recognizing that you focus on me, not the rest. That's that monolatry or henotheistic idea that's right there. And I want to emphasize this too, because even Yahweh, when you study the text, here's an important distinction. People who study the text, you have two, let's say, groups. You have the academics, the classicists, and then you have the religious scholars, like theologians. And the thing is, the big difference between the classicists and the theologians is the classicists just study the text. What does the text say? And let's interpret the text. This is what the text says. Versus the theologians will often spend more time emphasizing the question, well, what was the intention behind the writer of this? Why did they write this? What does it mean? This is a really important distinction, because the thing is that, like I said, language is important. The text may say one thing, but then some people may come along later and say, well, maybe it didn't mean it literally. Maybe it meant this. There's a term that's also in the theologian world called an apologist. People will go and see something that's like really horrible or a contradiction that's in the Bible, because yes, there's a lot of horrible contradictory stuff in there. Some apologists will go back and interpret the text and say, well, maybe it wasn't meant to be taken literally. Maybe it was a metaphor for something. So I want to just I tend to lean more towards the classicists and the evidence-based. Let's look at what the text says, because when you come into it with a belief, you start to have a bias, and you start to try to make sense of your belief by looking at the text. And I think that's a very slippery slope. So the thing is, as we start to go down this slippery slope through history, through the many gods and worshiping, and then there's this consolidation of power, something eventually comes along called monotheism, which is a very strict administrative, like there's one God only, none of the others exist. You could say Judaism is the oldest or one of the first monotheistic real religions that we still have today, obviously. But there are a lot of people that suggest that it goes back further than that, maybe not as an official monotheistic religion, but there was a pharaoh in Egypt called Akhenaten, who often academics will consider to be the progenitor of monotheistic thought. Akhenaten, living in a world of Egypt and the polytheistic pantheon of gods, all the people were worshiping and paying taxes, because that's the thing too, offering sacrifices to all these gods, living under this, massive bureaucracy of gods, let's just say. Akhenaten shows up and revolutionizes the system for a brief time. What he says is, instead of worshiping all these different gods, all that stuff is outlawed now, which pissed off a lot of people, let's just be honest. Akhenaten said, instead of that, let's just look at the sun. The sun shines its light on the sinners and the righteous alike. It's the source of life in this world. Let's just focus on that. that in itself is very indicative of what monotheism is. It's like we wouldn't be here without the sun. We wouldn't be here without the one. It's all about that. So it's like sun worship in a way. It's like a deeper, more all-encompassing sun. And the thing is, let's fast forward out of Egypt back to like Judaism, the three main monotheistic religions today, you've got Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. A lot of people don't even know this, but all three of these religions are drawing upon the original same source story about Abraham, this guy that was in a relationship with God, had a covenant with God. And there's different interpretations over the centuries. Like I said, interpretations. You look at the Old Testament to the New Testament to the Quran, there are definitely changes in the story, different viewpoints, but it's still drawing upon the same stuff. So as all these religions and these people are fighting each other all over the place right now, it's funny that it's like, well, we're all worshiping the same God, right? And who is this God? Well, the thing is that monotheism is really a thing that emphasizes and works with empire. It's a good system of control because it really focuses about centralized authority. It's like there's one God, you focus on me, stop, like Akhenaten did, centralized authority with him and his family, and said, stop worshiping, literally outlawed the worship of other gods. It's illegal to worship all these other gods. And that's how like these monotheistic religions throughout their time, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, have behaved even to this day. You worship my God or you're going to hell. You worship my God or you're burning forever in eternity. It's a really wonderful way to control a population, because if you don't abide by the rules, then you're a prisoner, you're a slave, you're other than us. It's a lot of othering going on that comes with monotheism. And so, like I said, this all comes back into these three monotheistic religions. But let's just discuss a little bit more, go back to what I was saying with this debate that I had with my friend. Like, he said monotheism came first. Well, the term monotheism didn't come first, this idea of one God and none of the others exist. No, but there's an idea this idea of understanding that everything is one. So even though back in the days of polytheism and the worship of all these different gods, there were people that understood this concept that we today call God the one, the source of everything. Plato called it the one, and it's an impersonal metaphysical thing. It doesn't do things for its own gain, and it's not a tribal god either. It doesn't favor one group or the other, and it does not demand to be worshipped. It's more, Plato saw it more as a guiding principle rather than like some sort of being that knows and controls literally everything in the world. And it's an important emphasis on unity. Monotheism, I'm not convinced that monotheism is the same thing. Monotheism, ironically, as much as it's all about one God, contemporarily, there's also this other thing called the devil, right? Or Satan. the evil one. So these two gods, even though there's one God, there's two beings that we seem to be in between on like a big game, just like as pawns in this big game. There's a great one of the oldest books in the Bible, actually. It's called the Book of Job, which of course comes later in the Bible, even though once the oldest, it's not the first book. It's this really messed up story, actually, about how Job is essentially being played in a game, like a bet between God and Satan. Like like, I bet he doesn't love you. I'm going to throw messed up things in his way and he'll still love me. There's a great movie that I think demonstrates this the best. It's called Trading Places. You have these two like multimillionaires that make a bet for $1 over how they can effectively change one person's life. Like just because one person's station in life is to be rich doesn't necessarily mean they were meant to be rich. So you could switch their places. This is kind of like reminds me of the Book of Job. So anyway, that's monotheism to me. So their monotheism is not the same as unity. And again, why this confusion exists, why this debate even occurs at all, is because monotheistic traditions rewrote earlier myths. For example, the book of Genesis, that book is based on older stories that are culturally relevant at the time it was written, that go back thousands of years. Like I said, from 10,000 plus years ago, that people like the Epic of Gilgamesh, the ancient Sumerians, a lot of the stories about this great flood and the creation of human beings and for what end, that's a much older story that got rewritten into Genesis. So as the Bible was being written, this authoritative book on monotheism, it essentially rewrote a lot of these myths to fit their particular worldview at the time. There's a thing that happens in Hollywood all the time. We'll take an old movie and then we will remake it, but for a modern audience. For example, Snow White. Snow White from the 1930s got remade now, but they altered so many things about it that to appeal to people that they thought would like it today, but ultimately it was a huge bomb because it didn't connect with the original source material. So these original writers were trying to keep that source material alive in the minds of the people, like pay tribute to it, but also to tell a new story. So a lot of these things, like the gods of the old world, they didn't get thrown away. They just got relabeled as demons or angels and idols. Like and one of the commandments in the 10 Commandments is no more idol worship. So the monotheistic worldview claims primacy retroactively. It's saying that this is the one way to worship things, and if you don't do it this way, you're bad, you're other. And that is not part of the ancient world, and perhaps one of the biggest cons on human people today. These monotheistic religions have been very, very detrimental, as good as they have been. Not casting any shade on religious people. Most people find religion to be very helpful and a guiding principle. It gives them purpose, a sense of community, a sense of understanding that you're not in this world all by yourself, something bigger than yourself. It's really good. But also the institutions of these religions, especially when they were created, when they first came about, were used to dominate and control people. That is the thing that I really wanted to sift away from this idea of unity, of God. I'm not saying God doesn't exist. It's not some sort of thing like that or an atheism. It's about recognizing, like, my opinion, what God really is this source of everything that everyone connects, like Star Wars. I like to use movies as a way to relate a lot of this stuff. Movies are a great tool to understand, like a universal language. The thing is, like, God, in my opinion, is like the Force from Star Wars. It surrounds us, it penetrates us, it binds the universe together. It's not like one good person or one bad person, depending on how you use the Force makes a huge difference. But within all of this, there's a secret hidden in plain view. Like I was saying, this idea of unity. It's a continuity. It's within all the religions. They call it a golden rule. Treat others as you wish to be treated. Some people like to think that that's a religious principle that, like, if we didn't know that, like if we weren't taught that, we would be destroying each other. But my understanding of it is that this is actually an innate power within us. This idea, like, it's an inner knowing that when you treat others with virtue and respect and kindness, it shares and reverberates, and they will treat you that way. So it's not a religious principle as much as it's just like an innate human principle, in my opinion. So the big difference here, polytheism, experiential, and monotheism is administrative. I want to be clear here, there is a lot of overlap. there is a lot of, like I said, the angel on one shoulder and devil on the other, depending on how you look at it. Those roles flip a lot of times. Polytheism had a lot of administrative problems. Look at Akhenaten, like when he tried to he made all the other gods illegal so that we can focus on the sun, maybe for a good intention, because there was just a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of people manipulating and exploiting the system to, again, control other people, to dominate. Let's get back to basics. So there was administrative in polytheism, and as well as an experiential thing in monotheism. I don't want to make it like a hard line. One is one and one is the other. There is overlap. But the thing is, in my opinion, monotheism, in the original thesis I'm putting out here, did not precede polytheism in the way that we look at it historically. Because monotheism says that you will worship me and no one else. That's very like fascist in my opinion. And as we start to come to a conclusion here, I want to just emphasize why this matters. Because this all shapes how we relate to authority. Authority, responsibility, and God itself. Because if God says you should do this, you do this, you do this, and you do this, and you don't do that, then you have no responsibility. You just have to do what they say. It's all about following orders, essentially. If you don't follow the orders, you're done. I was just listening to a podcast earlier of this guy, what's his name? Dan Huff. William Huff. He's a Christian apologist, and he's a very strict religious Christian person. And I remember growing up as a Christian, and my instructors told me this, that if I didn't accept Jesus as my Lord and Savior, I would go to hell. And I remember asking, if I didn't know about Jesus and I was still a good person, would I still go to heaven? And they would say, no, you're going to hell. No, you have to. It's like until Jesus got here and told you, then it doesn't matter. So you have to, again, pay authority. The responsibility is in something external outside yourself. And that really is a dangerous thing, because it's emphasizing that you have no connection to God. There is no connection to God other than getting on your knees and submitting. Submitting and surrendering is good in a certain context. You don't want to hold on to things too much. But at the same time, if you surrender and give away your power, well, there are a lot of manipulators out there. Human beings manipulate each other. And if you trace the line all the way back, that program, that behavior, all the way back, you start to see that there were some really dangerous, exploitative people that were essentially manipulating human beings for that purpose, to control them. It's easier to control somebody when they believe they have no power. Look at the medical world. If you believe you're a complete victim, then you have no ability to heal, and you have to rely on the doctors to heal you. Whereas there's this thing called the placebo effect. Because once you start to realize you're going to the doctor, then that thing that you were going there to get fixed all of a sudden becomes less of an issue. You feel better the moment you get to the doctor a lot of times. Not saying doctors are bad. Again, it's not about good and bad here. It's about understanding context. So it's a big shift in power from an inner experience that's a direct relationship. It's a two-way street. It's not a one-way street versus the one-way street. My way or the highway. That's monotheism in my understanding of it. So, like I said, it's a slide here. In conclusion, the question is not whether God exists or not, but whether belief replaced knowing. And I remember when I was in college, it was like an aha moment for me. When I looked at the word belief, I saw if you take away the beginning and the end of the word belief, you get the word lie. And essentially, that's kind of what beliefs are. You know, beliefs are stories. They're like fabrications that help us understand what's on the other side of that wall or that veil that we can't see beyond. So we have to make up stories to understand what's going on. Whereas the word knowledge, if you strip away the word knowing, beginning and end, you get the word now. And that word now is everything. We are in the present moment. That's what we perceive. We're in this, everything comes back to this present moment. Change is possible in the present moment. Everything. So as we move astrologically, as they say, from the age of Pisces into the age of Aquarius, which we're just barely getting into, by the way, this is a big shift in the world of beliefs and having faith into a world of knowing and understanding. So we're actually perhaps moving out of this world of separateness, of a veil that which we cannot see beyond. Whereas they say the ancient Greek word apocalypse, which means lifting or dissolving of the veil, we're starting to see what's going on the other side. Another movie reference, Wizard of Oz, when the veil is lifted. Don't pay attention to the man behind the curtain. Look what's going on in the world right now. The veil is lifting. Toto pulled the curtain away, and we see Epstein back there. And it's like, who are you, and what the hell are you doing back there? That's like one of the things that I like to see. It's like, well, maybe it's an immediate response. It's like everything we knew and everything we thought was wrong. Well, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's why I like to study history. I like to study the past so that we can understand what's good and what can we take from this. As a caterpillar transforms into a butterfly, it's not like it throws away everything. It just sheds away the chrysalis and emerges a new thing. So I like to remember that, because as much as there's this crazy stuff going on in the world right now, we have to recognize that there's really good stuff if we pay attention to it. If we have the eyes to see it, we will see good things. And we will actually start to recognize, like I started this presentation off before, community. The community is within. All the wise masters talked about this. They said, the kingdom of God is within you. The answers lie within. Well, that's not just a metaphor. It's an actual scientific reality that we have the opportunity to see now. And you don't have to be a scientist to get it. You can see it happen if you get cut or if you get a bruise. The body heals naturally. And there's a process, a natural process. And I just remembered something. I'll end on this in conclusion, this awaken within the dream idea, is that when we start to recognize that this world is a dreamlike world, it's not this separation of like what's fake and what's real. It's about waking up within the dream. Because the thing is when you're in a dream and all of a sudden you become lucid and have what's called a lucid dream, you can actually start to change the parameters of the dream altogether. Suddenly, it's not a dream anymore. Suddenly, it's a creation. You're actually in control to a large extent of what's going on. So waking up and going to sleep are not two separate things. You know, polytheism and monotheism in a lot of ways are not two separate things. They are connected, but we want to understand the context. The thing is, a lot of people say that the past doesn't matter. Well, that's in the past. I'm looking at what's going on right now. Well, that's a misperception, because the reality is, as much as we're in the present moment, we have this thing called a filter, which is called the past. We are looking at this world through the lens of our perceptions, which are our memories, our experiences, what we've learned. That's the past. The past is extremely relevant, because if we don't understand this filter through which we're seeing the world, then we start to realize that this world is not, we don't have any influence of what's going on. Just think of the image of a dog chasing its tail. That's kind of like where we're at, unless we understand the past. And the key distinction I'm going to leave you with here today is to remember, it's not about living in the past. You don't want to live in the past, but you want to be able to learn from it so you don't repeat the same mistakes as before. You know, that's kind of what the original interpretation of hell was, is that you don't want to end up living in a world of mistakes, because your life will be in ruin and you will proliferate ruin upon the world and onto others. If you learn from it and get back up, like Batman, Christian Bale, why do we fall, Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves back up. That's important. Don't lay there on the floor, and don't shame other people for being on the floor. Recognize that we can learn to get back up. And once we do that, we can start to stand with conviction and congruence. And we can start to actually do what we do in our dreams, but in our waking lives. Maybe in a different, slightly different way. But we can actually create this world into a dream. And we can't do it by ourselves. We have to come together in community. Compassion, respect, the golden rule. Treat others as you wish to be treated. So I hope that was interesting. I don't know if I went over. I might have went over a little bit in my time, but I just really appreciate
That was very interesting.
Thanks, Gina.
That was phenomenal. That presentation was awesome. Thank you so much, Alex. So much of what you said resonated. Oh, Alex, you got to mute yourself. When I talk, you got to mute. When you talk, I got to mute. Yeah. That was a phenomenal presentation. I know I've got a million questions. If anybody has questions for Alex, please put them in the chat. And we're just having a little laugh with our last speaker, Chris, because, you know, sometimes it's hard to figure out how to ask a question. So on that note, I'm going to attempt to ask my question here. It's more of a, what do you think about this? So first and foremost, the very title of your presentation, The Administration of Belief, I had a little laugh when I read that, because your uncle, Dr. Bruce, he's always promoting the biology of belief, and me too. That really resonated. And so when I read the administration, I was like, what? And then okay, so hear me out and then tell me what you think about this, okay? I had a hard time trying to word it, but so okay, so like an algorithm, it's like a program. It's a math equation. 1 + 1 = 2. It follows the pattern. And that's a very controlled thing. So you're stuck in that pattern until you can be conscious of it and make change. Otherwise, the algorithm just repeats and repeats. And for me, this algorithm, I feel like there's a connection to administration, because that very language, administration, makes me feel like it's not natural. Like there's another force trying to tell us how to think, tell us how to feel. And just like any administration, like a university, or even me right now being an administrator taking this on, like I'm in control, right? I control who's going on the stage, who's coming off the stage. But when it comes to the belief, I feel like, well, our biology of belief is also a very program, subconscious programs that are rooted within us. So, in short, I feel like algorithms are very rigorous. The biology of belief is more simple and more natural, but we don't know our own power. We don't know how powerful we are. So we don't even believe how powerful we are. We take our biology of belief for granted. We're like, yeah, whatever, biology of belief. But we really can change our belief. And so I was just having some fun with this play on language of algorithm belief, things being rigorous, things being simple. What are your thoughts on that? I know I threw a lot at you there.
Well, that's okay. You strike on some really interesting subjects there, and the first thing, like when you mention an algorithm, I think of again like the movie The Matrix. Uh, there's a scene in the second Matrix movies, which if you haven't seen the second two, not as great as the first, but really cool, interesting philosophy that's exposed in there. But there's this great scene where Neo, the one, shows up to the architect of the Matrix, and he's not the machine like the source of the control structure, but the one that created the actual matrix itself. And he's all about math and algorithms and equations. And when Neo shows up, the architect's perplexed because he says, I've gone through all the algorithms, all the possible variations, and you're the one variable. So within an algorithm, there happens to be a variable, which is our free will. That's what the matrix really goes into, is free will. We have this ability to choose. And it's not necessarily about choosing which way do you go, like externally, which is the emphasis I was trying to make. It's not about an external thing. It's an internal thing. Your choice on how you react to a situation can really influence something. And so when it comes to, like you said, I love that too. There's a biology belief, very simple. And, it's like a new understanding about how we relate to our minds and our biology, like a link between our minds and our biology. And I like the idea of administration too. A good movie reference to understand this perfect movie is Inside Out, the Pixar movie, where there is literally an administration of emotions within this child's mind that are pulling levers and pressing buttons, changing how the kid reacts to stimulus in the environment. So we have that in a lot of ways. It's a great metaphor for how our emotions and especially our emotions can influence the way we react. And so our emotions are drawn from beliefs. And the thing about beliefs, it's like when we say beliefs, like, okay, well, I have a belief. I believe I'm unlovable. That could, if you change that belief, it could really change your life in a lot of ways. But here's a good metaphor for you. Beliefs, in my opinion, can seem very simple. Like if you walk up to a breaker box in your house, the board that controls all the power in the various rooms and hallways and outlets and things. It's like this is what controls the power of the house. It's like this is like biology of belief. Here's the circuit breaker. You can control, it's like the lights have been out in most of your house this whole time, and you've been wandering around in the dark. Did you ever notice that you can come over here and flip a switch and turn the lights on? I've been turning this switch in my kitchen all day and all night. Lights won't come on. Well, did you know there's a breaker box that's controlling the power to that switch? That's biology of belief to me. But the thing about the complexity of it with the administration of belief is this idea that most of the time, houses are not as simple as light, like breaker boxes are not as simple as light switches. And I think about this a lot because my dad was a high voltage lineman and had a breaker box. And I remember when I was a kid, if I got in trouble, which hopefully wasn't that much, it's like, go to your room. And I got TV in there. I'm like, no problem, fine, I'll go to my room. And then I would go in there and my dad would go turn the breaker off to my bedroom. So like nothing works in my room. So I think about this a lot. But back to the thing about the breaker box is that one switch, let's say one switch is a belief. You change one belief and that kitchen light switch turns back on. Now the kitchen's illuminated. Now you can walk around, see what's going on. You're not dropping the eggs on the floor, the refrigerator. You can start putting things in there now. It's not going to go bad. So you made this huge change. But also, when you flip that switch, suddenly you walk around the corner and you realize there's a whole hallway that's lit up now that you didn't even know was there because you were trying to just deal with the kitchen. So the idea is that administration of belief is that our beliefs themselves are a little bit more complex than just like a simple belief. A belief is like the opening up the breaker door. But then as you start to do this work and understand this, and our beliefs are associated to things. That's what my presentations and my work is a lot about, is trying to understand what's the origin of these original beliefs. Where did they come from? For example, the belief in dominating and controlling others, which is very indicative of a lot of these religions and government themselves. They use this power of authority to control other people, control populations. We see it today. So it's like, what's the administration of this? It's like they live in our minds, like the angel and the devil on our shoulder. But perhaps those are memories, ancient, like morphogenic memories. As Rupert Sheldrake, this guy talks about the morphogenic field, memories that exist in the unconscious mind, taking Carl Jung's idea of archetypes into more of a biological way. It's like, well, maybe these archetypes actually relate to actual people or events that took place in the distant past that are living rent-free in our minds now. They're no longer here. They're not controlling us. We don't have the gods literally presiding over us anymore. We have governments and religions interpreting that stuff. But it's like, if we choose not to believe it, then it's not there. It doesn't matter. So again, it's about understanding that breaker box and recognizing that. So I hope that kind of answered the question a little bit.
That did. Thank you. That was a phenomenal presentation, very passion driven. Your passion for it really came through. I also made a note here because somewhere along the lines of your presentation, you reminded me about Thoth, because the Egyptian guy Thoth, he's the guy with the big bird nose kind of, and he penetrates. And my understanding is the magic about Thoth is that he encourages you to do your own thinking, that everything is just a thought, including us. And like you said, we can totally own those thoughts. And I find it interesting, this business of feelings even being these architectures and part of our consciousness, divas, devas, spirit guides, whatever language you want to use. Even bacteria and mycelium being part of that same ecosystem. And this business of believing in yourself and honoring your own thoughts. And what's fascinating is it seems like there's always somebody that wants to control and dominate, and this business of Thoth, like penetrating and constantly poking, because he has a very long beak, metaphoric to get deep, kind of like a hummingbird, get the finest nectar. But it also reminds me of like a chicken inside of an egg, because it takes 10,000 pecks just to crack the egg. And I feel like we have to go through this cycle where seemingly it's never ending, like the hero's journey. But at some point you peck it and it actually cracks open. And like you described with this hallway just kind of illuminating that you weren't even aware of, made me think about that. And any thoughts about what I just said? It's okay if you don't. I just thought I'd ask.
I do. I happen to, actually. Thank you. Those are really, I love that you invoked Thoth. He's one of my favorite deities from ancient Egypt, and perhaps was not even a deity, like it wasn't real or something, or a manifestation, but it's one of these archetypal ancient Egyptian gods. And that bird, it's actually an ibis. So yeah, that's a really important thing. And the god Thoth was the god of magic and science and writing. And the thing is, like today we see all those as different, but back then they were all connected. Egypt was a really incredible example. Imagine if, like, when you go to Disneyland and it's like you get to go on all the rides and live in this fantasy world, and then you leave and you just feel great when you leave. Egypt was like designed that way, except as a giant metaphysical learning machine. So when you went in there, you actually became enlightened to all this stuff, and it raised your energy, so that when you left, you became a truly educated person, where you understood that magic and science were not two different things. Again, depending on your point of view, if you dropped an iPhone back into the Victorian world in Europe, they might think that's like a magical demon thing or something, but that's science to us today. So Thoth is understanding that bridge between that, even writing. And there's an interesting side story about Thoth and Ra. Like, this is not like I wouldn't say this is like necessarily an academic point of view. There's points of interest that you can see based on the evidence. There is some links here, but a lot of these gods are related to each other, from ancient Egypt to Sumerians to the Babylonians. And there's a study called comparative mythology, where you start to see the connections and relationships between these two. But the god Thoth had a rivalry with his brother Ra, according to some interpretations, one that I tend to lean towards. And the thing about Ra, not the sun god Ra, but this being who in the Sumerian Babylonian world was known as Marduk. Marduk essentially becomes that figure of administrative control. There's this whole incredible story about Marduk slaying the goddess Tiamat, and how Marduk usurps the throne of the Anunnaki and becomes the one supreme god over the rest. You see a theme of how you went from many gods to the worship of one over the rest. Like, that particular figure, Marduk, was at odds with Thoth. And there's this crazy story too about how they had a big conflict where Thoth was trying to educate people, bring people to the language, or like teach people writing, help you understand the world, raise your spirits, uplift humanity. Whereas Marduk was like, no, I want to control humanity. If people know how to read and they know how to do magic, they'll be just as good as I am, and then they could overthrow me. So I'm going to have to get rid of that. So there's always been this conflict between humanitarian uplifting knowledge and control, enslavement, and domination. It goes back so long, and Thoth is like absolutely one of the coolest, because I love magic.
That was a great answer. And, it's worth commenting that we are the old people, we're the new people, we're the same people, wiser than before. And I take it all with a grain of salt, but there's a lot of interesting information out there and theories that, in a nutshell, we're just being recycled constantly over and over again. We're being alchemized, and we get better and better every time. And then there's like a mixture going in of lineages as well. The Moragon being one of those, the Tudor Dadanan being folks who lived here on this planet, and then basically they died and they were buried in the hills. But in truth, those hills were their homes. And so when they came back as spirits, they thought, well, let's go hang out in these hollow hills, only to discover, oh my God, that was me before. And so everything you're saying is inspiring all these thoughts. And also this business of living consciously, because when you live consciously, you can die consciously, right? So when you fall less hard. When it's time to get back up, you get back up with more ease. And this, of course, doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of work. It's part of our ongoing alchemy, our continuum of learning. And so I feel like monotheism, any kind of ism, I made a note here, give peace a chance, because it reminded me of the Beatles song, this ism, that ism, 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 ism. And when I was a kid, I would walk around being like, ism, ism, ism. That was the coolest thing. And now in my adult years, I know all these ism words, and honestly, you do get lost in them. And I noticed Jason made a comment somewhere. He was learning about some other kind of ism language. And that's the thing. Language is just never ending. So we have until 3:50 until we take our next break. So I'll turn it over to Alex again. But if anybody has any questions, put them in the chat. I know Julia is interested about a movie, but before we get to the movie, let's just see if Alex has any insight to share with us. Any insight, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. The whole the ism thing. It's like we tend to. I've been very questioning of dogma, of the strictness and the restrictiveness of dogma. Like one of the things that the early adages of science is this idea. My uncle says it all the time, that knowledge is power. And he emphasizes the other side of it, which is a lack of knowledge is a lack of power, which is really interesting and puts the emphasis on like how we've been disempowered through a lack of knowledge, a systematic lack of knowledge. Like knowledge has been burned and destroyed. And the knowledge keepers, the truth providers throughout history have been knocked out and culled away from us so we would get lost. But the thing is, too, about knowledge, which I find really important in my work that I think about, and I always think about it, is that the most important piece of knowledge that we really have and that we should cherish is this idea that we don't really know, which is an idea. We don't know. We don't know. We can think about it. We can use methodology and systems like science and empiricism to make an understanding of how we can know things and learn from them so we don't just do things randomly all the time. So there are certain things we can know, but on these deeper, more esoteric, philosophical questions about God or why are we here and all that stuff, it's important, I think, to remember that we don't really know. Life is a mystery. That's why when you go into these ancient cultures, you see things like, we call them today, mystery schools, which is kind of an elusive, and even that word elusive, it draws back to this culture in ancient Greece called Eleusis, the Eleusinians, the Eleusinian mysteries. There were experiential things that could happen that could give you a direct experience of what's on the other side. So it's all about having a relationship with the mystery. It's like we never really necessarily solve the mystery. We just learn to accept it for what it is and live and dance with it rather than dominate and control it. So the thing about all of that is I find it really important because if we think things are certain, then that's going to lead us down a path towards othering people. I know the truth, you do not. I'm going to tell you because I know better and I'm going to tell you. These people are good, these people are bad. And I'm not saying at all that there's no such thing as good and bad. That's really important. I want to emphasize that. There is a polarity, like a magnet. There is a positive and negative pole on a magnet. One's different than the other. Absolutely. And yes, depending on how you use the magnet or what you're trying to use it for, one could be more appropriate at certain times than it is in other times. I've had these ongoing conversations with my cousin about ethics and morality and ecology. All three of these things describe this idea of the polarity, but from, one's more from like a biological point of view, like a science ecology, what degrades a system versus what empowers a system. And then morality, more of like a system of laws. Moralitas, the ancient Latin word. It's like, like what's moral in, like one part of the world is not necessarily moral in another part of the world, but they both live morally in their own unique culture. So it's kind of culture dependent. Whereas then ethics, going back further in time, it's this idea about virtue and like living in a virtuous way, having character. So, like it's like as a system of laws in a different way. And again, there's a lot of overlap. We use these words interchangeably a lot of times. It's not about the words as much as it's about the meaning behind the words. And if we get out of our own way and we start to actually listen, like it says in the Gnostic Gospels and probably even in the many sacred texts all around the world, if you have the ears to hear, you will hear it. If you have the eyes to see it, you will see it. That if you can look beyond the meaning and stop getting hung up on the words themselves. No, like that's not the thing. That's not the thing we should be focused on. We're getting lost here in the weeds. We need to recognize, again, have humility, understand that life is a mystery, that we can actually make mistakes and learn from them, that we're not meant to live alone, that we're supposed to come together in community. Like a lot of religious people will say that is like traditionalism, like it's all about the family, and family obviously is important. And it's also about community. Well, no, community, no, that's communism. I'm left wing and that's a right wing. It's like, see, again, we take the words and we start to distort them. But again, like the answers are within. Like you are both at the same time. You are an individual and you are a community. You live in the middle of that. I am made of trillions of cells and bacteria, but I also am Alex Lipton, as far as I believe it. And that's the thing, is like, that's what I call myself. That's what I was given, and that's who I live by. But we're so much more than who we've been named. We're so much more than the proverbial clothes that we wear. There's something deeper that's more omnipresent that we all share. So that's like a really important message, is that we share more in common as human beings than divides us. It's just we have these crazy analytical programs that have been programmed into us, and they go back into culture. And like, if you and back to the isms thing, went on a long tangent, like isms and ideology. It's like, if you live by an ideology, then you start to really narrow your options. You start to close the window on what that mystery is. And you start to follow such a strict group of rules that, again, it's like, if something comes up that's new, because life is always changing, then you might overlook it. Like, you don't have the eyes to see that. There are some religious people that believe that we live under a dome and that there's nothing else outside of us, and we're in some sort of like science experiment from like God or whatever. And if like aliens were to show up, it's like, well, no, there won't be aliens. There won't be aliens, because we are the apex species. We are the God's creation. So they don't even look for aliens, let alone think about them. So isms and ideologies keep us constrained in that. It's good to play around with them, but the big difference between an ideologue and a philosopher is that a philosopher, a lover of wisdom is what that means, will actually be able to try on these different shoes, so to speak, walk around in them, walk around in this idea. I can explore Christianity. I can explore Islam. I can explore ancient Vedic traditions. I can explore Buddhism. I can explore atheism. I can explore all these things. But then the thing is these are just the shoes. I can take them off, and I can learn from my experiences and remember the walks I took in all of these different shoes. And again, my personal point of view, as a philosopher point of view, is to recognize that there is a continuity. There is a congruence between all of these things. There's truth buried in all of these things. Even in Scientology, like, doesn't matter. It's like it's like we have to entertain them just a little bit to put ourselves in the shoes of other people. If we just say, no, I don't accept that, that's like the monotheistic thing. It's just like, well, then you're wrong. I'm not going to listen to you. That's a human being you're talking to. These are all human beings with stories. And I love your show. It's the story species, story medicine. We are storytelling creatures. Stories help us learn. They help us grow. They can also distract us. They can also disempower us. They are everything. But remember, this is one of the most important things I learned from doing like work with Native Americans and different tribes and stuff, is this idea that we don't really own anything as human beings. Life is a gift to us. Everything is borrowed and it will be returned, even our bodies at some point. But the thing that we do, or we can take ownership of, if we choose to accept it, this invitation, is this story that we tell ourselves about who we are and how we relate to the world. We can take ownership of that story and change the story. That's what it's all about. We can rewrite the script. We are not, the script is not written in stone. Your life is not a printout of something that you had no control of. Well, maybe you were given a script and now you're in the production phase. Life is the production phase of a movie. The 3 phases: pre-production, you write the script; production, you shoot the movie; and then post-production, you edit it, and then you go watch it later. We're in production right now. We can rewrite this thing as it happens. So that's a really important thing. Like my uncle says a lot, take your power back. Take your power back, but I also want to temper it with wisdom. Power is important, but you have to have wisdom. Knowledge is important, but wisdom is even more important, in my opinion. It trumps, no pun intended, it trumps knowledge, because wisdom is the experience that you have of the mistakes, of the successes, and then you learn from them. That's why elders are so important. You learn from them. They're the ones you sit at the feet of and you listen to their stories. When I was your age, this is what I did. And like, if I were you at your age, this is what I'd be doing. It's like, we want to take that more seriously, because if you have knowledge without wisdom, that could be very dangerous. That's like giving a very dangerous weapon to somebody that has no wisdom or temperance on whether or not to use it. That's the world we live in today. We have a bunch of people we have maximum knowledge, maximum technology, but it seems, at least, especially in the West, in the Northern Hemisphere, there's just very little wisdom going on. There's still that like us versus them narrative, and we're ready to just use knowledge to destroy other people. Knowledge empowers, but can also control. People that control and covet the knowledge, that can be a very dangerous thing. If we cultivate wisdom, which is something you can't be taught, you can't be given wisdom. It has to be something you experience. And we all have these experiences. That's why when you go around, you meet people, if you're open to listening to their story, even if you disagree with them, that's the best part. If you can see past that and not take things personally, and let's treat others as you wish to be treated. If someone's hurting you, get away from them. But if they have ideas that you disagree with, you should try to engage, try to learn, try to understand. And then use your little BS detector, belief system detector, and whether or not you can move forward or move away from that person. I think we need to be in a process of moving together, coming together, because let's face it, the reason I made this presentation here is because I have this ongoing work, this project to identify who are the real tyrants in this world. There's a tyranny going on. Plato talked about this in the Republic, the great city will thrive until a tyrant shows up, which eventually is ultimately precipitated by a lack of education. When education starts to go away, then the tyranny starts to emerge. So if we can identify that this tyrant is actually trying to control us and get us to separate, to isolate. I'm different than you. I identify as a man. You're a woman. I'm different. I don't want to watch the Barbie movie because I'm patriarchy or based on sex, based on race, based on religion, based on politics. It's like if you're identifying yourself by these ideologies and these isms, then they got you right where they want you. They got you separated. You're on this team and that team. We need to come together. We are all on the same team here. There's a small group of, for the lack of a better term, very ill people, very ill-minded people that have a really destructive, radical, religious conviction about how the world works that is in complete opposition to how life works itself. It's an adversarial belief system. Even the word adversary, the word is in Latin is Satan. Satan means adversary, not some devil, not some say evil with the horns and everything. It's an adversarial ideology that has gripped a group of people that they believe something is very dangerous. We need to recognize it's there's more of us than there are of them, and they're not even the problem themselves. It's the belief that they have. And where do they get that belief? We keep encouraging it. We keep authorizing it. We keep playing it out. That's how they get away with it. They're not doing this to us. They're putting the system in a way that we're actually playing it out, which then when we complain, oh, we're being victimized by these oppressors, it's well, yeah, you kind of signed the permission slip. It's not our fault. You did it, which gives them the permission. We need to stop giving them permission. And the best way to do that is to start coming together in community. Start recognizing the commonalities. We all breathe. We all need food. We all need water. We all want freedom. We all want to have a decent living. We want to have fun. We want to have a purpose. Everyone shares these things. Everyone shares these things. So we start to come together. Yeah, I guess my audio got cut out there or some I don't know. Something happened. Uh, this is yeah, now I'm not hearing you for some reason. Oh, bummer, guys. Sorry about
I
this.
was on mute. That was my fault.
Oh, okay.
Sometimes it's the user.
Okay. All
I,
right, good. Like it's you
um,
never know.
but we're going into overtime. So if somebody has to get a drink of water, go to the bathroom, it is our official break. We're going to honor Suze Gallagher. Checking my notes here. Suze is going to be live at 4:10. But Alex, if you don't mind sneaking in this one question here, what do you think about the Disclosure Day trailer? Lots of hype about it.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I'm gonna see it. I'm looking forward to see it just because I love movies and. But to me, it's just it's one of those things. It's like too on the nose for me. It's like we've been, if you follow anything UFO related or UAP disclosure stuff related, we've been moving into this direction for a long time. They have these, Hollywood is part of a very deep, elaborate occult disclosure system that's been going on since the birth of Hollywood, like especially since 1940s. And so Disclosure Day is just the next step along their regularly scheduled programming of releasing the truth to people and revealing it. There's this term called revelation of the method, where eventually, when the wizard is revealed from behind the curtain, they will come out in such a way and explain to you, this is how I did what I did. I'm going to tell you, I've deceived you for so long, but here, fear not, I'm going to explain to you how I deceived you and why I deceived you, and you're welcome. That's the revelation of the method thing. Is so they have this like pipe dream, in my opinion. It's totally uninformed wisdom. Like this radical echo chamber that they have in that world because it's so compartmentalized of the UFO disclosure, like Majestic 12 and all that. That they think that when they come out and reveal what they've been doing and showing us, we did it for your own good. It's not going to land. Like Dorothy says to the wizard, you are a very, very bad man. And he says, oh, no, Dorothy, I'm not a bad man. I'm just a poor wizard. It's like, and we're meant to feel sorry for him. It's like the Disclosure Day movie to me just seems like we're moving in that direction. Like, I've heard rumors that Steven Spielberg might actually be unveiling like subliminally like some actual reverse engineered alien craft in the movie. And it's wow, that's some great CGI, but like people are so unfazed by CGI now they won't even care. So like they could literally like pass a real reverse engineered UFO on the screen and nobody will care. And that to me is what Disclosure Day movie ultimately is. It's just another layer of desensitizing us to this idea of extraterrestrial life, that our government knew about it the whole time, and just so that when we walk out of the movie like in a hypnotic trance, like we'll kind of forget the important things they'll tell us, and just like when eventually it is revealed, there'll be a silent but deafening compliance to the whole thing. And I'm interested to see it either way. I love Emily Blunt, and we'll see what happens.
That was a phenomenal presentation, Alex. Thanks for going into overtime a few minutes there to answer that question. Really appreciate you being here today and getting your stuff to me and being here live. And it was nice that you were able to connect back here, but I really appreciate you and your presentation. Very, very thankful. I'm going to remove Alex from this stage. Make sure you connect with Alex. Thank you, Alex. We'll see you next time. We are on the official break, so if you didn't catch that, that's okay. You can always catch it on the replay. But you are now in for